Morning, everybody. Just make sure all the microphones are turned off. Welcome to the County Plan Committee, taking place on Tuesday, the 2nd of May 2023. My name is Alan Bell. I'm Vice Chair of the committee and I'm chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live through our YouTube channel. Before we commence with today's formal business, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. Can I ask everyone to switch off or make silent their mobile phones, please? Please keep microphones switched off at all times unless invited to speak by the chair. When invited to speak, please switch on the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. We have a number of officers with us this morning who I will now ask to introduce themselves, starting with Ian Croft to my right.
Good morning, Ian Croft, Committee Services.
Neil Carter, I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Stephen Reid, I'm the Planning Manager.
Chris Shields, Senior Planning Officer.
Steve France, Senior Planning Officer.
Graham Blakey, Principal Planning Officer.
Phil Harrison, Highway Development Manager.
Jarvis Robinson, Highway Development Engineer.
Okay, thank you everybody for that. Item number 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence for today's meeting?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Richardson and Zare.
Thank you, Ian. Item number 2 is substitute members. Do we have any substitute members in attendance? Yes, Ken?
Councillor Ken Robson from Aycliffe West, standing in for Sam Zare.
Thank you, Ken. Item number 3 is declarations. Sorry, Mike,
Don't know how you can miss me, Chair. Mike McGowan, Lanchester Ward, standing in for the Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any members have a declaration of interest on the business on today's agenda? No one, thank you. Item number 4 is minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of April 2023. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of April 2023? Thank you. Item number 5 is applications to be determined. Item number 5A is land west of West End Farm, Front Street, Ingleton, DL2 3HS. The first application is for the installation of a below-ground pipeline and associated works on land west of West Farm, Front Street, Ingleton. We have no registered speakers on this item, and I'll now ask Chris Shields, the Senior Planning Officer, to present the report, which is at pages 9 to 40 of your papers pack. Thank you, Chris. I'll now thank you, over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this application is a follow-up to one that the committee determined last July, which was a pipeline from Lartington to the Shildon Service Reservoir. This section is just a small diversion of that wider scheme, just to the west of Ingleton. And you can see on the location plan here, the site is outlined in red and just straddles the B6279 road, so just to the west of the village of Ingleton. Look at the aerial photograph. You can see it's all just pastoral fields here. The pipeline will be fully below ground in this area. During the construction works, there would be some laydown areas and welfare facilities, but that would all be taken away towards the end. Any loss of the hedgerows between the two sides of the road would be replaced as part of the development. There's a view looking northwest across the site. So the pipeline would roughly follow a path in here. It's again fully below ground. This is a B6279. The pipe would go underneath that. Just a layout of the site here. As you can see, this is just being tipped about 90 degrees clockwise. So previously, the pipe would have been in a trench about 90 metres further east, so on this alignment. So this application's come to you because they've had to redraw the red line boundary, and because it's more than a hectare, it's actually about 5.5 hectares. So that's the main change to this scheme over what was previously approved. We've had no objections from statutory consultees or internal consultees, subject to some conditions, and we've had no representations from members of the public. The proposed development would form part of a wider development to provide additional water capacity and resilience to the existing water network serving County Durham and Teesside. It would replace Victorian area essential infrastructure necessary to support the growing population of County Durham and beyond. These works involve the replacement of a strategic trunk mains pipeline, which will be set within a trench below ground. The pipeline will run from Lartington Water Treatment Works to Shildon Sarahs Reservoir. That's the overall scheme. Consideration has been given to the principal development, amongst other factors, and found to be acceptable, subject to conditions where appropriate. It is considered that the proposed development accords with relevant policies of the County Durham Plan and relevant sections of the NPPF. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chris. No registered speakers on this one, so straight over to the committee. Any committee members wish to speak? Councillor Carmarshall.
Thanks, Chair. It's fairly straightforward, this one, I think. Thank the officers for the work they've put in, but I'd just like to formally move the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Carl. Cathy, over to you.
I'd like to second that. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks, Cathy. Any other committee members wish to speak on that? No. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 5B is the A167-B6443 Central Avenue, Newton Aycliffe, Durham, pages 41 to 62. It's for the creation of a new junction and associated highways improvements on the A167-B6443 Central Avenue, Newton Aycliffe. We have two registered speakers for this item who are in attendance to answer any questions members may have. I will now ask the case officer, Steve France, to present the report, which is at pages 41 to 62 of your paper pack. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a new road junction on the A167 at Newton Aycliffe. You can see from the two images on the screen there, it's at the northern end of the road as it passes the village, on the entrance to the secure facility and the school that's on the east side of the road there. Sorry, that was the wrong button. The junction at the moment has a left-hand turn effectively into Central Avenue, the main access into the village, and that's important both as a transport artery and as part of the historic layout of Newton Aycliffe as being part of the original village for the layout of the town, hence its wide verges and its inclusion and particular relevance given to it in the Newton Aycliffe town plan. It's quite hard to make a road junction look romantic, but I think I did quite well on the top left-hand photo. It was a nice night, but you can see the junction here from different angles. Top left, you can see taken from the east side of the road, standing in the bus lay-by, southbound. And you can see the footpath that is at the end of that. That's where the road crossing of the A167 is at the moment. At the bottom right, you can see the entrance out from the east side, out from the secure unit, and that's effectively where the significant change will be in terms of the layout for this. But you can see in the various pictures there are footpath crossings there at the moment, both across Central Avenue and across to access the bus stop and the facilities, the institutions on the other side of the road. The changes, therefore, you can see between the aerial photograph on the right-hand side, which shows the simple T-junction arrangement at the moment, and the proposed leg on the right-hand side, which will, in the first instance, access those existing facilities on the east side of the road, but is, as the report sets out, eventually to access a housing allocation that's provided for in the Durham County Plan. A significant development, but one that isn't ready for submission yet, hence this application sitting by itself at the moment. The two proposals are, of course, very interlinked, but this application has to stand by itself. You can see at the bottom of the layout plan there that the small spur, which is the existing access, which is to be made good and reinstated. You can also see the slight bulge on the new access. sorry, this is a long way to point this, on there, which is the SUDS arrangement. Sustainable drainage, which will be planted inside. It'll be a dry bowl, and it includes a little bit of the ecology offer. But again, from your report, because of the tight red line around the site, there is a need for additional ecology to facilitate this. We'll go through quickly the various representations, but the one representation in objection that's been received has basically asked for a roundabout instead of this crossroads arrangement. This type of junction is, because of the dominance of the main road and the new left filter lane into Central Avenue coming from the south, a more efficient and safer way of controlling the traffic. It's not for cheapness. This is a more acceptable way of controlling the traffic as it is now, and will be in the future when hopefully the housing allocation is to come. The housing allocation, like I say, is for the future, but we do have two of the project management team here today if you've got any questions about the junction or that future development. And they have indicated they would be happy in the future to arrange a session to brief in the future to explain to members of this committee who will be determining those future applications what's intended there and how it sits with the current application. In terms of what's been received then, highways have no objection to the scheme and note the inclusion of the pedestrian and cycle crossings as part of this. The county ecologist, like I say, because of the tight drawing of the red line around this and because of it sitting separate to those forthcoming schemes, has asked for a contribution of £70,000 to be spent on biodiversity gain in the immediate area. There have been discussions with the town council about providing this within their land, and that would be the most appropriate way of doing it because of the slight tree loss on the Aycliffe side of the road. However, that hasn't been agreed as of yet, so that is one option. But the submission of this money by transfer of funds is the best way of securing this as a fallback position, just in case those discussions come to naught. Archaeology and environmental health have no objections subject to conditions. The archaeologists would like some investigation as part of this. Again, they were looking at the wider scheme but need their requirements addressing as part of this. Environmental health people have commented on this element as much because there's a standard requirement where there's roadworks next to residential property for the working hours and the dust and noise arrangements to be appropriately covered. And the other representation we did get was querying that. So there's a condition proposed in your report to cover those, and environmental health are happy with the proposal. Great Aycliffe Town Council has no objection with any conflict in the neighbourhood plan outweighed by the long-term benefits both of this in its own right and accessing the allocation in the county plan. And I've mentioned the two letters we've got. Effectively, this application has to be considered on its own merits as a road junction, notwithstanding it's for something in the future. And both in terms of the highways efficiencies it will bring and in terms of how it will mitigate itself through those net biodiversity gains, officers are confident that this is the case, that it can be recommended for approval. The application is recommended approved for you, subject to a transfer of the funds for biodiversity gain. I'm happy to return to any screen or layout you'd like, but over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Steve. We have Heather Orton and John Hogarth. To see for questions. Heather and John, would you just like to speak prior? Is there any questions? Okay, then we will now move over to the committee. Anybody like to make any comments, observations? Councillor Craig Martin.
Yeah, Craig Martin, councillor for North Lodge and Chelsea Street. It's really good to see a scheme for improving the highway infrastructure before we get the housing. It's always one of those big gripes that the house building comes first, and then the infrastructure to make life easier for the community tends to come at some point distance in the future. So yeah, it looks like a good scheme. I'm very happy to propose that we agree with the officer's recommendations.
Thank you for that, Craig. Cathy, did you have your hand up? Yeah, Councillor Cathy Hand.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Craig. I think it's really good to see that it's in place before the building, so I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Kathy. Patricia? Patricia Joblin, okay. Any other comments on that? No. Yeah, I have to echo what Craig and Kathy says, that is regarding getting the infrastructure, the roads put in first of all, because sometimes when a development happens, it's always a case of pushing, like sort of you have to push the sort of the roads and infrastructure through for, yeah, to be adopted and stuff, and it becomes a bit of a chore, so it is good to have it up first. Any comments from Heather or John? All good? Okay, we had a move and a seconder. All those in favour of the application? Thank you, that's unanimous. Item 5C is our final application today, is an outline application for the purpose, thank you Stephen, purpose-built student accommodation comprising of up to 850 bedrooms with all matters reserved on land to the north of Mount Oswald, South Road, Durham. We have 2 registered speakers for this item, and I'll now ask again Planning Officer Steve Rance to present the report, which is on pages 63 to 100 of your paper pack.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair said, this is an outline planning application, so in principle, for the purpose-built student accommodation comprising of up to 850 bedrooms with all matters reserved. So effectively, the images you're going to see are for information to show that the quantum of development proposed can be fitted on the site. It's also interesting to note that there has been a previous approval for this development on the site here that expired, so this is a resubmission. The planning application is within the red line there on the Mount Oswald's development, and you can see both from the map image there and the aerial photograph next to it that it's surrounded by a number of different landforms and development types. To the left is one of the housing developments that's been carried out, St George's Way overlooking, facing across the development. Below, you can see some of the remaining historic parkland and the Mount Oswald house, previously the golf club house that's now being extended to provide the history centre for Durham County Council. To the right of the land, you can see another purpose-built student accommodation development with a round hub building there and some interesting architecture. Above the top, the straight line is Mill Lane, which has been surfaced for cycle and pedestrian use as part of the overall development. And the line you can see at the bottom of the photograph as well is another cycleway. That one's not bound. The striking feature of the site itself is the landform. There's only one particular feature of planning note above ground. There is a pipeline in the northeast corner of the site that the developer is aware of and has to work around. But in the centre of the top photograph is the single tree on site, which is subject to a tree preservation order. Elsewhere on the wider Mount Oswald development, the woodland around the old manor house in particular is subject to orders. But that's the only designated tree on this site. These photographs look east from the estate road. You can see in the top photograph, like I say, that tree. You can see the St George's Way in the distance, predominantly 2-storey in height, but one of the later photographs will show there is one of the units which is 3-storey. On the right-hand side is the University Hub building. Middle photograph shows that the development is surrounded by a bus route already with a roundabout just off to the left, round which the buses turn, which is from where the bottom photograph was taken. In the opposite direction and from the other side of the site, effectively by the student accommodation that's already been built, you can see in the top left that 3-storey unit. I hope you can see from those photographs that there is a significant change in levels in this part of the site. The land falls away and more steeply in that northwest corner of the site, and that is reflecting on some of the sections and the conditions we've sought to apply to this. But you can see from this that the land is basically unimproved grassland. It has an occasional tree or bush on it, and it has been allocated in the master plan that's been previously agreed and outlined for this site, as detailed in your report, for either this use or for more residential. As I said, this is an outline application with all details reserved for future determination if you are minded to approve this today. But the left-hand image shows how that development could be laid out, and in particular in relationship to the residential development on the left-hand side to the west in St George's Way. The land falls away, so there is an opportunity for a development that is as high as the student development you saw in the last photographs, which was about 4 stories high on the lower part of the site, climbing up to a 2-storey height on the west side of the site. Now, the northwest side of the site is particularly lower, so on the 2 indicative sections you'll see, the college as shown, small buttons, you can see the existing residential property in St George's Way on the left-hand side there, an indicative 2-storey arrangement climbing up to higher at the left-hand side. There is a condition to try and get that similarity of scale across the site. The bottom section, as you can see, it climbs up slightly taller to 3 stories adjacent to the site boundary, but that's where the site falls away more. Again, the control of that scale is for determination through the reserve matters, but there's a condition there to try and get that scale equivalent to the residential properties where it's on the site boundary. Also important potentially is, as you can see on the left-hand image there, the blocks are arranged so that they present their gable ends to the existing residential development. That would normally have the service element in it as well, so there wouldn't be an expectation of facing living room windows between the student accommodation and the standard residential accommodation, and that would help any issues with potential noise as well. You'll see from policy 16 of the county plan that there's an absolute requirement for the assessment of the relationship between the residential amenity expectations of normal residential properties and students as part of a management plan and the layout of this. And again, that would be for determination later on. It's just worth noting again that this type of development, this form of development, has already been approved once in this location. In terms of the representations we've received as part of this, Highways have no objection to the scheme, noting that the likely traffic movements and the proposed management plans to be submitted later on. That can come down to the detail of the ebb and flow of the beginning and end of term, where anyone who's been aware of the city in recent years, or for as long as some of us can remember, in terms of when the beginning of term and all the cars turn up together, can have an unreasonable effect. That is proposed managed through the management plan. Likewise, the control of the ownership of cars will be part of that, hence the reduced parking expectations of this and the enhanced cycle links and cycle storage to be proposed within the scheme, both of which are mentioned in the submission. Northumbrian Water and the Coal Authority have no objections to this. Because of the numbers of people who are going to be occupying this, if it is approved, the local NHS Healthcare Trust has requested £178,000 to mitigate the demands that are likely to be provided by that. Durham University, critically, offers no objection to the scheme. That is a requirement of Policy 16, both in terms of demonstrating there's a need for the accommodation and an academic need for this as well. Spatial Policy have identified a need for an additional contribution of £613 per bedroom. Obviously, as an outline scheme, we don't know exactly how many bedrooms there will be at the moment, to mitigate the demands for open space proportionate to the demands of the occupants. The standard methodology we use for this includes typologies such as toddler play and allotments, which potentially are not elements that is going to be within the demand for students. The county ecologist accepts that the proposed scheme will need potentially need off-site mitigation because of its size. Again, it will depend how much they can provide on-site. And they agree that this can be delivered through a Section 106 agreement and secured in terms of the management and the monitoring of it over the required 30-year period through a Section 39 agreement under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. That is the element of the scheme where Office considered it's not wholly policy compliant, in that the development plan is obviously formed of 2 parts here, the county plan and the Durham City plan. The county plan allows for ecology mitigation to be provided across the county council area, so long as there's, within what they call the trading rules, the typologies are appropriate. The city plan obviously wants that mitigation provided within the city plan area, and where the developer has identified the off-site mitigation here is an area of land near Tow Law at Inkerman. That fails the neighbourhood plan, but it meets the county plan. That is in the planning balance as to whether this is acceptable or not. Officers think it is. That's for your decision. In terms of the other statutory consultees, including archaeology, design, drainage, conservation, and the list on the screen there and in your reports, there's been no other objections. City of Durham Parish Council, note the scheme is endorsed in their neighbourhood plan, and they offer its support. The City of Durham Trust does not object in principle, but requests conditions with any conflict to the neighbourhood plan likely to be outweighed by the long-term benefits. The chair of the Mount Oswald Residents Group and local residents feel disadvantaged by the outline form of this. They can't tell exactly what the effects are going to be, so they can't comment in detail on it. And they have concerns about the nature of the application for traffic, disturbance, residential amenity, loss of open space, biodiversity, and for potential scale in the detail that's reflected both in the officer's report you've got before you and their representations that have been available online. There has been a late objection submitted after the committee report was written just last week, that contends that Durham City has become a campus of Durham University with local residents increasingly marginalised. I think it's reasonable to say in response to that the policies of the neighbourhood plan are to try and centralise student accommodation in developments such as this and areas such as this, so as to potentially free up housing in the city centre. In summary then, officers consider the benefits of concentrating the student accommodation are accepted. The proposed mitigations are proportionate and required by the development and will mitigate the effects of the development. And the detail that will inform both councillors, officers and local residents' assessment of the detailed scheme is capable of challenge. It is capable of refusal if it's not acceptable. This isn't a rubber stamping job. This is just to accept the principle, and anyone who has offered comment or been consulted on this current application will, as a matter of course, be consulted as in any new application in detail that's going to be received in the future, if you do agree this. So, subject to the proposed legal agreement, officers recommend this for your approval.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, just one comment on if the application was approved, the reserved matters, would that come back to committee?
It can do if requested.
Thank you for that comprehensive report, Steve. Much appreciated. We have one objector speaking this morning, and that's Mr. Calacorti. Can you address the committee, please? You will have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm a local resident living in Mount Oswald, and I'd like to bring some serious concerns to the attention of the committee. Durham is a university city, and the need to provide student accommodation is understandable. But this needs to be done in a way which also considers other residents who also call this city home. Appropriate and up-to-date evidence needs to be provided before new student accommodation is approved. Having reviewed the application and relevant supporting documents, it is clear to me this is not the case here, so I wanted to raise the following concerns. Overall, given how long this application has been under consideration, it is clear that a lot of the supporting evidence is out of date. Firstly, the lack of evidence for the need for the development. Notably, Durham University itself has not supported this application by private developers, but merely raised no objection. Indeed, their own university strategy until 2027 actually projects a drop in student numbers from the amount currently enrolled. Significant numbers of purpose-built student accommodation are already provided on the Mount Oswald site. There is a fundamental lack of evidence as to why the proposed major expansion is needed here and now. Elsewhere, the Council's local plan already appropriately addresses the need for purpose-built student accommodation up to 2035, with 6 other sites already allocated to meet this need. I can understand in principle the desire for the Council to support purpose-built student accommodation as a way to protect family housing through change of use to student HMOs. But family housing in Mount Oswald and in other key areas of Durham City are already protected by Article 4 directions, so that the Council retains full control. Of course, this site has previously received approval, but this was back in early 2018, before the local plan was adopted and other sites were allocated. Without doubt, this Council has shown that it supports growth of all types of new space, but all applications should be supported by up-to-date information so that a full and considered decision can be made. This is not true in this application, with much of the submitted evidence not being updated since the original submission. A lot of the evidence is more than 5 years old, which means it predates the adopted local plan, and indeed many of the homes closest to the site. This fails to provide a full picture of the area you are being asked to make a decision on. Looking first at the ecology evidence. The ecology evidence to support this application is out of date. It was produced before fundamental changes to environmental law, namely the Environment Act 2021, and multiple new versions of the way outcomes for nature are calculated. The biodiversity net gain metric has been superseded 3 times since the version used in this case. I'm not saying that the applicants can't deliver biodiversity gains, but as a minimum, I feel they should be demonstrating this to you using the up-to-date tools so that you can have confidence that nature and wildlife can be protected before you make your decision. Avoidance, mitigation, and on-site compensation must be addressed first, as set out in the Environment Act and also National Planning Policy Framework, as well as Policy 41 of the Durham Plan. Developers cannot simply look off-site first for compensation or financial contribution as the first port of call, as is proposed here with the off-site at Town Law. Turning to transport, much like ecology, there are gaps in the transport evidence provided. All the transport evidence is, to support this application dates from 2016. It appears the applicant has avoided providing significant transport evidence on the basis of proposing car-free development. Despite these claims, councillors should know that residents from Mount Oswald are already experiencing ongoing and significant issues with students parking on our narrow estate roads.
You have a minute left.
Something that is reflected in the many objections submitted. This problem causes distress and safety concerns, and this proposed application would significantly exacerbate this problem. Claims of car-free development are not a reality. Of course, these hundreds more students and their friends and families will bring more cars to the site, no matter how close the nearest bus stop is. Rather than car-free development, what we will get is more cars, but with nowhere provided for them to park safely. It is clear from prior submitted objections that local residents have deep and valid concerns about the proposed expansion of student residences so close to our homes. There are clear issues with the evidence submitted to support this application, and I believe this all needs to be addressed before a decision is made. On this basis, I would urge you to defer this application this morning. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for that. The second speaker today is supporting the application is Mr Hancock. Can you address the committee, please? You will have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for this opportunity to speak today in favour of our application at Mount Oswald for student accommodation. I am Justin Hancock, Principal Planner at the Banks Group, and I've worked closely with your planning officer on this application, and I thank him for his comprehensive report, presentation and recommendation of approval. I thank also the Parish Council for their support in this application. I've been working on planning matters at Mount Oswald for over a decade, which in itself is a measure of Banks' long-term commitment to development with care on a site near to our company's head office. Mount Oswald has been planned and designed with considerable care to the quality of living conditions for all its inhabitants, house owners and students. The landscape setting and master planning approach are key to this. The development as a whole makes a very significant contribution to the City of Durham, economically and socially, as a new opportunity for house purchasers and students alike. At the outset, it was agreed that the Mount Oswald site provided a unique opportunity for purpose-built student accommodation to relieve some of the pressure which was building up in the city with student lets, houses in multiple occupation, etc. The university supported this concept and eventually developed a first phase of student accommodation with 2 colleges and 986 students. We believe this has been a huge success and benefit to the city because without it, those students would have had to find lodgings elsewhere, which is becoming increasingly difficult. They might well have forced out non-students from the city and its suburbs. In 2018, as you've heard, we gained planning permission for a second phase of student accommodation, which was in line with master plan expectations. We believe that we would have started this development by now, but the main reason we were unable to do so was the impact of the COVID pandemic, which created uncertainty in the student accommodation market for a critical period during the life of that outline permission. But the position is now much clearer, and we are confident that if granted permission, we will be able to bring the development forward this time. As you're well aware, Durham is a highly constrained environment with greenbelt, flood risk and World Heritage status, all impacting on opportunities to site significant new development of this scale. This is why our application site represents such a unique and unmissable opportunity for the city. The application is in outline with up to 850 student bed spaces, likely to be in cluster flats. If successful, we will work with a delivery partner to firm up all the design issues and the management plan to ensure the impact on students of the residential population is negligible. We believe that the 2 existing colleges have demonstrated how this is possible. The development will have facilities and, of course, will be located near to the other university facilities. If approved, we'll be making a financial contribution to local doctors' surgeries and public open spaces to the benefit of all residents. We will also be providing biodiversity net gain in the county in line with county policy. This is on top of all the open space and biodiversity already committed and delivered at Mount Oswald. I hope that the committee will agree that Mount Oswald is an ideal place to provide this type of managed student accommodation and that you will support this application today. I will be able to answer any questions the committee may have about this application. Thank you.
Many thanks for that. Steve, would you like to come back into any of the items which was raised there in relation to the objector? Thank you.
Just briefly, thank you, Chair. The application has been with the Council for a long time, since I think it was November, December 2020 this was submitted, and the consultations went out at that time. Because of the length of time it had been with us, we did a full tranche of reconsultation earlier this year to allow the statutory consultees and the internal consultees the ability to reconsider their comments and see if they needed any additional information. And to make sure, in fact, that the advice was up to date. Particularly in terms of the ecology has been looked at in terms of the up-to-date legal requirements, but also in terms of the evolving offer of this site. You'll remember fairly recently there was an application for 9 units elsewhere on this site, which effectively took up the last element of available on-site land for net biodiversity gain, hence why we're suggesting it's off-site here, and hence the conflict with the neighbourhood plan. Both in terms of that and the up-to-date response from Durham University and from highways officers in terms of their expectations and the world post-COVID and traffic flows and expectations of parking and the like. The report does reflect, we believe, an up-to-date policy and legal response to the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I move to the committee in relation, sorry, Steve, I should have said that, in relation to the out-of-date data, which the objector referred to, are you comfortable with that?
Because the application has been with us for so long and because it used part of the supporting information from the previous approval, we have had to take a judgment on that. But to repeat myself, we are confident that our recommendation is on up-to-date information where we've needed additional information or additional consultee responses. We've asked for them. So yes is the short answer.
Thank you, Steve. And open up over to the committee. Councillor Patricia Joplin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do need purpose-built student accommodation in Durham. Durham's a very small city, and some of the student accommodation that we have at the moment is not what I call fit for purpose. And a lot of the houses that are converted to HMOs are very unloved. I've seen over the years on planning committees the encroachment of HMOs into housing estates, into social housing estates, and that's always worried the committee that this is happening. So for me, yes, there probably are negatives, but for me, I think that purpose-built student accommodation is the way to go, and perhaps release some of those houses. The owners have got to do that, but if they haven't got a client to go in there, it won't take long to sell those houses to families where they can be used in the correct way, and Durham can begin to look more, instead of looking really unkempt in some of the streets, begin to look like a very nice city. So I'm of the opinion that to go with this recommendation on this. The only thing I would bring up is the ecology side. How do we know, how does a planning committee know when we do this off-site that it's been done? How do you ever come back to a planning committee and tell them?
We can, I'm sure, report back. The Section 39 element of the recommendation here is for a monitoring plan to make sure that the ecology is implemented properly, and that extends over a 30-year period. So, if there's elements of that type of off-site development that you would like, I'll speak to the county ecologists and see if those can be reported back. Whether it's site by site or as an overall thing, I'm sure we manage that for you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Patricia. Mara, over to you.
Thank you. I've been quite deep in thought on this application. Are we at the question stage or the comment stage?
Comments.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, so I'll ask my questions and then come back with comments a bit later. My apologies if this has already been covered. I am quite deep in thought on this. The first is around the biodiversity issue. I'm a big fan of Tow Law, but if it's in the local plan for the biodiversity net gain to be spent in the city, then why are we overlooking sites like Coffle Woods or Old Durham Gardens area? Why are we overlooking the riverbanks? Or why are we even overlooking somewhere like Gilesgate, which is a deprived area that does have green open spaces that could probably do with a bit of investment in its biodiversity? Why is it going all the way west? And second of all, I'd like to address the objector. Thank you so much for coming. It must be quite daunting to sit in front of us lot and talk about it, and you spoke very well. But I know that area quite well because I went to school up there, and we always had a big problem with my classmates parking in residential areas and blocking residents in on a morning. I'm sure that Esther knows all about it, but I was just wondering how many of the cars that are parked there are uni students versus students from the high school. Because when I was at uni, a different uni, but a collegiate university, where we had a similar issue with parking, none of us were allowed to bring cars to uni unless we got a permit because we were disabled or we played the drums and had to get a drum kit around. So what, I know it's not strictly a planning question, but what are we doing with the university outside of the system around our memorandum of understanding around students bringing cars to uni, because surely this is a university policy issue as much as a planning issue, and they do feed into each other.
Thank you, Maura. This brings Stephen. I think on the biodiversity, I know that's issues being brought up in the north, and I'm going to look at Councillor Martin, because I've known of it twice when when there's no larger sites in the area, and officers, the size of sites have to be of a certain size, so sometimes they've got to move outside of that set area. But I'm sure Steve will sort of highlight that.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the ecology, the preference is, as the objector said, always for delivery on site, then delivery as close to. There's also got to be land available for, and whilst the areas you've, and there's trading rules as well to try and get as close a typology of ecology that's being lost on site to what's being proposed as well. So the way that's set up, you can't easily replace wildflower meadow with woodland or that sort of thing. Effectively, the land at Towlaw is available, and whilst those areas you've said about, I'm sure, would benefit from ecology gain, the county ecologist has sort of a bank of projects and places where we can implement something in the immediate future in response to a planning application. And this is what's been suggested and discussed, as I said, following those the recent final capacity issue being addressed on the Mount Oswald site with the development of the 9 houses just to the south of this. To a large degree, we're in the ecologist's hands on this, but this was felt as appropriate in terms of the type of offsetting that was proposed and how close it was. But the development is always better if it's closer to, and that's the reason why the report flags up that it's contrary to the neighbourhood plan, because it isn't within the area, so it's a judgment on that. I think.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Could I make one follow-up?
Yeah, would you like to come back on that?
Thank you. It was just as the ecologist here today.
No, I'm afraid not. In terms of the parking, this isn't necessarily a university development, it's a commercial development, so that management plan will be there to try and control the parking as far as possible. If it works, it's an implementation thing. It's set up with the best of intentions and with all the safeguards we can get. Obviously, the offset of the lack of parking there is to provide as much sustainable transport for public transport access and for the cycle network, which has been there as well. So this has been discussed with the Sustainable Transport Network team. You'll see from the report that the cycle parking's got to be to BREEAM standards, and the surrounding cycle networks to LTN 120 standards in terms of the layout and the finish and lighting and the markings on the cycle network. So the parking is a bit of a carrot and stick as well. It's not all just about trying to control the cars, it's trying to encourage people to do the right thing.
Thank you for that, Steve. No. Councillor Craig Martin, you had your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. You know, there is a student accommodation problem in Durham, and I know people have referenced residents, but thinking about the students themselves, is that you know, anybody that kind of keeps their ear and hears what's going on with the student population, that there are massive arguments, discussions about the lack of student accommodation and the kind of sky high kind of rental prices they have to pay to go to this university, and it is purely down to the expansion of the university and the lack of new student accommodation stock being added to the market that is causing this storm for students. So you know, I'm supportive from that position, and you know, residents hate HMOs. It's you know, they absolutely despise them, and if you're not going to go down the route of HMOs in every single sort of neighbouring street, the solution, the only alternative is purpose-built accommodation in one patch. So you know, I fully appreciate the kind of objectors from the Mount Oswald site who live there, and I can understand why that the issue is. But there's a balance here of the kind of benefits and harms of, you know, this is what we have to live with in a university city. Secondly, the ecology. Thank you, Councillor Bell, for referencing the discussions that we had at a previous planning committee where I raised the need to kind of find the ecology. I'd find it very unusual if the committee, should we say, went down that route, because I didn't get support for localised ecology when I put it forward to the committee. But in actual fact, my biggest concern here is actually the kind of breach of the neighbourhood plan. I think there really are important documents that are created and developed and put in place by a community, and it does concern me, and it raises a massive red flag. But the parish council aren't objecting to this. I wouldn't go as far to say as they haven't said they support this application, but they've not raised any objections to this. And if they're not going to object to it, I'm not particularly going to object as well, and I'm happy to second if that was a proposal there. But I will highlight the fact that I still have questions and concerns at this stage. I think a lot of what the residents and the residents group have raised are red flags in my head as well about a lot of those concerns. But this is an outline planning application, and I look forward to seeing what the full application will be, and I will be coming to that with the similar sort of questions that residents have come with, and looking for answers for those questions from the developers when that happens. And I'd be also interested to see what the City of Durham Parish Council say about the ecology and how it relates to the neighbourhood plan when we get there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. So, and also to be able to do that, we'll need to request that the reserved matters comes back to this committee. Is that, are you making that request formally? Yeah. Okay.
Chair, just to confirm, I think any request for a reserved matters application to come to this committee would have to be made at the relevant time. So when we're actually in receipt of that application, rather than sort of preempting it now.
Thank you, Neil. Maura, did you want to come back, and then Pete? I'll come in, Pete.
Yeah, thank you. So even if Banks is on the document, I think it's difficult to view this as anything but a university application, even if they're not corporately putting it forward. The university's plan brought hundreds of students, thousands of students, to the city where I was born and I grew up, and where my grandma lives and where I look after her. And many of them are very, sensible and very considerate members of the city community. But fundamentally, it's completely, it's just a tragedy that so many of them have been given inappropriate housing. They're queuing outside, they're paying through the nose. We have one of the cheapest accommodation markets in the country, in the county, but in the city we have one of the most expensive, purely because of the way that the market has been churned by the university's own corporate master plan. And I laughed when I heard that the university wasn't objecting, because quite frankly they have no bloody right to object, because we're in a strange situation as a committee. Usually when we have these kinds of applications, it's because we're going to be bringing more residents into the area, and so we have to think about it in those terms. But those residents are already here. We're basically retrofitting the city to fit the needs of the university as it's grown already. So for that reason, I would find it really difficult not to support this. And I do think it's important that we make sure that students, if they're going to be paying through the nose, they're not paying through the nose for a mouldy old HMO that has very little oversight. If they're paying through the nose, they should at least be able to not have a leaky roof and have their taps run hot water when they need to. I've heard too many stories from my own friends at the university to be able to support anything other than that. So I do think that there's always a place for us to work on the basis of residents' concerns with the university through our Memorandum of Understanding, but that's clearly not for this committee. I am going to make a counter proposal though. My proposal is that we accept officers' recommendations and approve, but with the condition that the money is spent in the city. I'm in the slightly awkward position of agreeing with Councillor Martin. I know that he and I would say it doesn't often happen, but he was right when he said that the local plan is an incredibly important piece of paper. He was absolutely spot on there. It takes a lot of volunteer time and effort to put it together. There's a lot of blood, sweat and tears of people protecting their local area. And if we can stand together and support it, then I think we should. It carries planning weight. So if the local plan says that the money is spent in the area, then the money has to be spent in the area. And if the recommendation has come as a result of a call from the county ecologist, then I'm sure that we're in a position as a committee to be able to make a different judgment. So I move accepting with the amendment of the money spent in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. I'll, just before we just come back to that, I'll bring Pete in. Pete, would you like to make a comment?
Thanks, Chair. With this application and looking at the site, I'm tending to go along the lines of the residents with this. In this country, most of our cities, if not all, and major towns are increasingly becoming one big campuses. The local population within the town centres that I refer to as townies have been moved away, out, because for whatever their own personal reasons, a lot of them don't like to live around students, and that's not offence against students. Obviously, the young people, a lot of life, and a lot of the older residents of families, etc., etc. Councillor Joplin mentioned that purpose student accommodation, and she is right. We do need purpose-built student accommodation, and it's got to be in the right location. I don't agree when she made the statement that if this is built, then it will free up the students and move out of the houses and move into this accommodation, because a lot of student accommodation within the city is done, particularly around the viaduct area, at terraced houses, and not many families would want to move in those type of areas. They want a detached house, semi-detached with a garden, somewhere to park the car on the drive, etc., etc. So, and without knowing that there's a cap on students or population within a university, the students' population would just increase and increase. So therefore, we're creating more problems. And I don't think this particular site has been properly thought out. I can't see that the utopia behind this of mixing student location with residential location would work, because in reality it doesn't, because yeah, we mentioned the park and we mentioned the different type of social life and everything like that, and I do believe that in this location here that there should be kept a buffer zone, if you want to call it that, between the existing students accommodation facilities that are there now and the residential properties that are there, and we've got to respect that, mainly the residents there. So I'm against this application.
Thank you for that, Pete, and some valid points made. As a committee member of the Central and East, and I know like other people in this room who sit on that, and you know, like sort of monthly for the last 14 years, like it's always been such a contentious issue when you know HMOs are coming in and taking up you know sort of family homes. So it's a difficult one. It's getting that balance to, as you say, Pete, whether this is the answer, I don't know. But in relation to the site, historically, I think the site was it down as a mixed site in the earlier days. Steve, I'm going to ask you just for a quick comment on that one.
Both in terms of the master plan that was prepared for Mount Oswald, that had the housing areas and the student areas within it, and the county plan itself, this has always been sort of an area where it's been targeted for student concentrations to try and pull students towards the main university campus, potentially with the aspirations set out in the neighbourhood plan to free up family housing in the city. I've been planning in Durham for far too long now. I started in 1989 when a lot of the terraces were still family accommodation, but whether the expectations of family accommodation in the 1980s is the same as they are now for parking and sustainable travel and, you know, being able to just jump on a bus and get to work or get to the station is two different things. But I think the county plan sets up to try and don't know if how fast Ian can write, or if I can say this fast enough so he can't get it. You know, there's always been a bit of shutting the door after the horse has bolted with the student accommodation in the city, but whether this is to control the expanding population into the right places or to try and give some relief to the housing types that are in the city, it might not be that you know, where the old planning office used to be in Byland Lodge, the terraces along there were family housing, whether they are now more acceptable for people on the first rung of the property ladder or not, I don't know. That's just it's personal opinion. But the county planning policy 16 basically says, you know, we need to try and concentrate where we are providing for new student accommodation. It should be purpose-built rather than just sporadic across the housing stock. And whether it's shutting the door after the horse is bolted or not, I think in terms of the basic approach, this is the correct one, and it is policy compliant.
Thank you, Steve. That's really helpful to hear that. Patricia, I'll just bring Patricia, Mike, if that's okay.
Just to add to what's already been said, I see this development as an aid to bringing Durham back to being a city that is lived in. For many, many planning committees, we have discussed these single houses being made into an HMO, stuffing them with 5 students. There's nobody oversees that house. It looks shocking when you drive by. Nobody tends the front garden. They don't do anything. And if you've got purpose-built student accommodation, anyone that's had children and been into purpose-built or proper student accommodation, they make sure it's clean, they make sure it's tidy, they make sure it looks right. I can, seriously, this is slightly out of town as well, which hopefully will change some of those streets in Durham, because no student is going to pay a huge amount of money in a terraced house when they can go and get purpose-built accommodation, probably at a cheaper rate. So to me, I think this is going to alleviate some of the problems, because Durham does, where there's high student accommodation in these terraced houses, look very, very shabby. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Mike, I'll just bring Mike in more and then I'll come back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I sort of agree with what Maura said, as well as Craig. I feel the pain from the residents, I genuinely do. I represent a ward which is blighted with parking problems, similar to what you experience on a daily basis. However, as has already been said, we are a university city. You know, the centre, there is problems that has been highlighted, and I think most of the committee, if not all, understand that the current problems which are experienced by students coming in and not suitable accommodation, which has already been pointed out. I know Maura's proposed a slight amendment in that the city or the gets the money. I think the pain, where the pain is received, is where should get the money. So I would like to second what Maura's already said, and take this to a vote. I think it's you know, we could discuss this all day. The reality is we are a university city, and purpose-built accommodation, even at the expense of residents, unfortunately, we are where we are with that. But purpose-built accommodation is what is needed, so that students aren't blighted, paying too much for too little. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mike. And Maura, I think we'll move into the vote. I'll just go to Maura and then quickly come back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Just on Councillor Malloy's point about families wanting to live in the terraces, when I was growing up, the families did live in the terraces, and I don't think it's, I think some families would like to live there still if they get on the property ladder in the city, but also part of our strategy as a county economically is that we want the students to stay afterwards, get jobs, you know, good jobs, and contribute to the local economy where they've settled down, where they've met all their friends and their partners, and that's the kind of housing that really appeals to young professionals. Just want to come in.
Thank you. And finally, Craig, did you want to add another comment there?
Yeah, Chair, just in reference to the amendment that Councillor McEwen's kind of present, I have to say, if the committee accept this, I will be either left speechless or with expletives when I come along, because I believe also Councillor McEwen was in attendance when I raised the issue and put my, should we say, amendment to the application. So I'll be very surprised if the committee do vote for that amendment, or shocked, should I say. But to be honest, I don't believe in bringing a sledgehammer to a provisional planning an outline planning application. I promised you, if when this comes and it comes back in full, right, and we have signed a similar ecologies, we're having these discussions, the parish council are coming forward and they're saying, what on earth are you doing for our ecology money? I'll back you then, okay? And I promise you, I'll be sat in this committee back. In fact, I might not be allowed to do that. I might be actually breaking planning rooms. I apologise if that is the case. But as I see the solicitor is looking very nervous. But at this moment in time, right, I want to give the developers the chance to come back with a full planning application and for us to have a look at it and then debate this. So I don't believe in bringing this. I won't be backing the amendment at this point, okay? But let's see what comes along at the next thing.
Okay, then Kathy, was there anything, I was just going to move to the vote, was it just anything important there?
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly for me, the resident who spoke very well, thank you, did highlight the fact that some of the data in the reports isn't up to date, and I would like to request that in future we do get up to date reports.
Thank you, Kathy, that's noted. And yeah, just before I just ask Neil to come in, because we've got two proposals here. So Neil to clarify how we're going to move ahead with this.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you say, I think we've got two rival motions. We've got a motion for approval in accordance with the officer's recommendation. We've also got a motion for approval with a slightly amended legal obligation to deliver off-site biodiversity improvements. I think the way to deal with that is to take the first motion first.
Sorry to interrupt there. Could I just get clarification? Did we get a seconder for Moira's proposal?
Yes, it was Councillor McGowan seconded that. So I think if we take the first motion first, we'll see where we get to on that. If it's lost, then I think we do need to have some further discussion about how exactly the biodiversity requirements within the city would work. So,
okay then. Moving into the vote of the first proposal, we had it was moved by Patricia and it was seconded by Craig. All those in favour? So that officer's recommendation is carried. And then the second proposal falls? Yeah. Okay, that application is approved. Item number 6 is no further business from the Chair, and that concludes today's committee, and thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you.